¿Qué onda, amigos? ¿Cómo están? Bienvenidos a este nuevo episodio de su podcast ¿Qué te tomas? Yo soy Beto Ruiz, su podcast host, y estamos de regreso aquí en el show. Hoy no puedo decir en su podcast favorito porque estoy con otro podcaster esta semana, así que ahí la competición se vuelve un poco difícil, pero muy emocionado de mi invitada de esta semana porque la sigo desde hace tiempo en redes sociales, me gusta un montón su contenido, me gusta la manera en que piensa, también escucho su podcast. Viene, es como de esta nueva generación de latinas con una voz que está elevando lo que es el sentir de los latinos, no solamente en lugares donde no habíamos estado antes, pero en ciudades que tampoco nos habían escuchado tanto, que es en Nueva York. Pero voy a dejar que ella se presente. Sofía, ¿cómo estás? Bienvenida, ¿qué te tomas?
Gracias. Me llamo Sophia Zarate, soy mexicana-americana. Mis papás los dos son mexicanos. Mi papá es de la Ciudad de México, mi mamá y toda su familia son de Guadalajara, Jalisco. Yo crecí en Laredo, Texas, que es, ¿cómo se? It's like a border town.
Border town,
right?
yeah.
So the whole town is very much Hispanic. So I grew up with people that all look like me, similar mentalities, and it's a bit close-minded if you think about it, because you step out of that comfort zone and it's a whole different world. So I grew up in Laredo, Texas. I came to New York City during my sophomore year of college. I was supposed to be here for one semester. Okay. And then I just decided that I didn't want to go back to Texas, and I stayed, and I've been here for almost 7 years. But it's been a very interesting experience. I think it took me a long time to truly feel like New York City was home. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I loved about New York City when I first moved here was the diversity. Like, I had never been exposed to so many different cultures and foods and languages, mentalities, everything. And so it's truly a melting pot, right? And I love that about New York City. But at some point, I think when I started my professional career, I was like really disconnected from my like latinidad.
Claro.
Y como que me sentía sola en una ciudad tan grande con millones de gente.
Te entiendo.
Yeah.
Te entiendo 100%.
I think it's taken a while for New York City to feel like home, but now I'm in a place where it would take a lot for me to leave New York City, because I'm so attached to it, and now I have a whole community here and everything.
I know, and that we'll get into that too, you know, because you're a community organizer, a community uniter, I want to say. Pero a ver, lo que quiero resaltar es que ¿qué te estás tomando? Porque ¿qué te tomas? Le mandé un mensaje, le dijo, oye, ¿qué te quieres tomar? Me dijo, a wine or a margarita, ¿no? Mm-hmm. Me dijiste que those were your go-to. Le dije, pues una margarita. ¿Sí te la hiciste?
Sí, pero como que do it yourself.
Yeah. Like the DIY version.
Como que no sabe así como las margaritas buenas del restaurante, pero okay. Pero aquí tengo mi margarita.
Bueno, pues si if you're ever in Sacramento, we'll make sure we make you one. No, gracias. Thank you so much for sharing that. 7 years in New York City. But it's true. Like, lo que hay en Nueva York y lo que hay en California no se puede comparar a ninguna otra parte de Estados Unidos. Uh-huh. Y aunque eres de Texas, ¿sabes? Uno esperaría que hubiera más diversidad en Texas. Being that it's like right there and right next to Mexico. But everything really is like, that's like the ¿cómo se dice? Epítome, like, sí, ¿verdad? Esa es la palabra, pero de Mexican Americans, right? So like that's what basically what that represents. See, I'm trying to get like those expensive words into the podcast nowadays. Pero, oye, ¿y cómo es que llegas a Estados Unidos? I've listened to your episode with your dad. That was very moving. And I'll recommend everybody. We'll do a shout out at the end, of your podcast. But ¿cómo es que llegas a Estados Unidos? O sea, sé que fueron varias piezas ahí.
Sí, de hecho, mi niñez fue como un poco loca porque unos años estuve en México, unos años estuve en Texas. It was very back and forth. So I was born in Laredo, Texas, but my parents were separated at that point already. So I was born there. I was there for like less than a month. And then my mom took me to Guadalajara. And we were living with my grandmother. I have 2 older siblings. And we were there for, I don't know, like a few years. And then from the age of like 4, I think, until I was 9, it was like every other year, like going back and forth. So when I was in 1st grade, we tried to move with my dad without my mom. And it was very difficult for my dad because my brother and I were so attached to my mom. And so we made his life a living hell. Like, we would like literally just be in front of him and tell him like we hate it here. Like, we want to go back to Mexico.
You weren't lying though. Like that was the truth. That's how you felt. I don't think we talk a lot about, you know, the feeling as kids. I mean, we talk about when we're older, you know, how hard it was to grow up in an immigrant household and being, you know, Mexican Americans or, you know, from wherever you are. But I don't like, even for me, I don't think I've ever acknowledged my feelings as a kid, because similar to you, you know, I was born here in Watsonville. My parents were agricultural workers, and in one of those trips, I was born, right? And they took me to Mexico, and then 4 years later, we came back. We were here for about 6 months, and then we went back. And then when I was 9, we came back, and we were here for 6 months, and then we went back. So like, it was always this back and forth, you know, like kind of like taking me out of where I was from and then putting me somewhere. And then as soon as I was kind of like growing something, then I was back where I was from before, which wasn't that hard because I had friends and whatnot, you know, my family in Mexico. But it was that, so I never knew, you know, I thought that was normal. You know what I mean? It's like, I never understood, I never thought, my friends aren't doing that. I never thought, you know, these people are here and they're here for their entire life. You know, like, I thought it was like a thing for everyone. Yeah, it's just crazy. And I actually appreciate you saying that, you know, like on your podcast. As I said, I listened to that episode. Entonces, te vienes, what was your first impression of the US? Do you remember?
So it's very interesting because I feel like I always liked the US just because ever since you're little, like, everyone ingrains this idea that like the US is so safe and
it's the best.
Like, it's just so much nicer. Like, you have a nicer life in the US, and you know, the English language is like, you know, everyone puts it up here. I don't know. I just thought like, oh my God, if you're in the US, like, you made it, right? Like, ever since I was a little girl. So to me, it was like, okay, that's so cool, right? And even just as a little girl saying, like, being able to say like, oh yeah, I live in the US, like, as a Mexican American. But to me, my true like home when I was little was Mexico. And it was very difficult for me to think of the US as like my new home and to in a way assimilate, you know, to the new life, the new culture, the new lifestyles and mentalities. I will open up on this podcast about like the true reason why I ended up in the US, because I don't think I've like put it out there yet, like on any platform, but I think it's a very specific story, or like, I guess, a very unique story, because I never wanted to live in the US. To me, it was like, if I, as like an 8-year-old, if you asked me, like, I wanted to stay in Guadalajara forever. And like, I was estranged from my dad and my dad's family because it's not like I saw him often. So I was very attached to my mom's side of the family, and I would have never said myself like, oh, I want to move with my dad. But when I was 8 years old, I mean, you know, like, Mexico goes through these phases where there's a lot of crime and stuff. One of my uncles got kidnapped. And this one uncle was like my father figure. So to me, it was like my dad got kidnapped, basically. Like we all lived in the same household and stuff. And it was like a very weird experience because I like was not freaking out, but all I wanted was like for him to come back home and to see him, right? And I have like a very vivid memory of when he like came out in the news because they like found him, and like I think it was 2 other men that like they had kidnapped with him, and I like my grandma was just like sobbing and like, oh my god, like that's my son, like, you know, it just kind of like absolutely. The relief, but also just like in shock that, you know, that happened. And I remember when they brought him home, my mom was like, okay, you all can like go up and see him, but make sure to not like make any faces or, you know, like don't react to the way he looks because he's pretty beat up. And I was like, I don't care, like all I want is to see him. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And I was just like very grateful that like he was safe and like at home now. And but after that experience, things changed so much, you know, like
between your family, like for
with
you,
the whole family, and for me, like I was an 8-year-old that was scared all the time. And my siblings and I used to always go to like La Tiendita. That was our thing. Like,
I love
we
that.
would get home from like elementary school y nos daba 5-10 pesos mi abuelita. Íbamos a la tiendita and we would buy some chips and candies, come home y a ver la novela. Like whatever kid novela was on.
La
like,
de las 4, ¿no? Alegrijes y rebujos. Exactly. No, I remember. I know exactly what you're talking about.
That was like our routine. And I remember just like after that happened, it was like we could not go anywhere just like by ourselves. Like even though it was one block down, like they wouldn't let us go by ourselves. And they were like, we have to go with you. And it was very like my uncle like moved with to like my aunt's house because they all like lived together, and it was just like very different. And I found myself like not being able to sleep at night because I would hear one little
at 8 years.
At 8 years
so when
old,
you were
I would sleep with my grandma, but I would hear like a little sound. You know how sometimes like the furniture like creaks or whatever.
Cracks,
And, or like she had like 2 windows, and I would hear like people talking or something late at night, and I would freak out thinking that like they were out to get us. And at 8 years old, like I could not sleep, and sometimes like I would cry because I'd be so scared. And it's crazy because so my siblings they didn't have citizenship because they were born in Mexico, so they would have had to go through the whole process, right, of like getting your papeles. And but I could go to the US like at any time.
So you came with your dad first, or did everybody come together?
I went first. So my dad reached out to my mom one weekend during that time and said, my grandparents, he said, my parents are visiting Guadalajara, like blah, blah, blah. And like, please at least like give them the choice, you know, like an 8-year-old, like ask her if she like has any interest in coming.
That's when so like, and these are other things that a lot of people don't understand with like children of immigrants and immigrants. Like, you have to make these life-changing decisions
when you're a little kid
at 8-year-olds. Like, I mean, there's people that people are gonna die without having to ever think about, do I ever want to live in the place where I live? You know, and you had to make that decision at 8 years old. That's just the maturity that you have to gain after that, because now you see the consequences of a decision like that early.
I know, and it's crazy because had that not happened, I would have never said yes. But since I was so scared, it was, and you know, you hear that like the US is so safe, so that was just like my escape. And even
so, you came for the safety of the US. That's what you wanted.
Did not want to leave at all. They asked me, and I was like, yes. So for a whole year, like my first year in the US, I would cry almost every night. And I know you like listened to the episode with my dad, and he was like, yeah, it was horrible because I had no idea. Yeah, like he couldn't help. I was miserable.
No, I get it. I thank you for sharing that. First of all, thank
Yeah.
you so much for opening up about that because, we all make these stories of like the different reasons we came, but like and they're all different. But safety, it's so like that's even I don't even know how to say it. Like la gente que viene para tener una mejor vida, that's one thing, right? But like if you're coming because you're afraid of for your life, that's even higher out there, right? It's like you're not coming because you want to live better. No, you're coming because you don't want to die or be
Yeah.
kidnapped. So thank you. That's respect to you, seriously, and especially 8 years old. I mean, I tell you, I came here like I moved for good at 17, and I cried every night, and I was a 17-year-old, and I can only imagine how you felt as an 8-year-old without your mom, and like just feeling, I mean, lonely, man. Like it's just and not understanding the language, and like it's
Even like the tiniest things that you would think like, okay, don't be ridiculous, right? Like, cálmate. But
like
I
why?
would cry and tell my dad like, es que extraño la comida de mi abui. It's just like a simple thing, that's like the
That's not
cuisine.
simple, though.
Yeah.
No, it's wow, man. Like we all miss or places in different ways. I would cry, and I don't think I've ever said this in the podcast either. But I would cry listening to La Arrolladora. Like it's the La Arrolladora Banda Limón, because my friends and I, like my best friends, we always would go out. Íbamos a dar la vuelta con esas canciones, and we each had like a specific song that we would take. We would serenade, the girl that we had a crush on, and like it was
That's
three of
cute.
us. So we each would take, like every night. And with those songs, I would just be like, "Fuck, man, I miss." But deep down, now when I talk to my friends, with my wife, and I'm like, I think deep down, I somehow knew I was gonna end up in the U.S.
Really?
Having a dad, that he used to work, and he used to come to the U.S. every year. We would see him like 70% of the time, only like 4 months a year, and I mean, I didn't have a plan in Mexico. I came at 17, like, and I became a student here. I didn't know how to study. I never failed a class, but I wasn't a student, I made those friends that taught me how to read a book. Or, for me, if it was like, okay, you need to read chapter 1 and 2 as a homework, I was like, okay, there's no homework.
Yeah,
I'm
right?
not reading,
If it's just reading, it's not happening.
But I learned here, but okay, for sure. So you moved here, you were 8, and from that moment on, you stayed in the U.S.? When you were
Yeah,
8?
so once I moved, I had just turned 9, like when I moved here, and so I started like fourth grade, and I was so shy. Like it's crazy to think of me being like a shy little girl because I'm so like out there with like so many people that they're like, you're a total extrovert. But I was like so shy. I was so scared that like people would make fun of me because I couldn't speak English or because I had an accent or I said something wrong. So I would just like not talk.
Oye, a ver, y de eso, ¿qué piensas de eso ahora al revés? Ahora que tienes ya la mayor parte de tu vida viviendo en Estados Unidos, ¿sientes eso ahora hacer en el español? O sea, ¿te da ansiedad? Y, no, de verdad, es una pregunta seria porque, por ejemplo, hay alguien, te tomaste una foto con ella hace poco, Ana Pau.
Ana Pau, wow.
Y ella,
Yeah, I love her.
sí, y me encanta su contenido, ¿sabes? Y hay algo que a mí me hace enojar, me encabrona cuando la gente utiliza el término no sabo qué. I hate it with all, like it's just because that's what I used to be, but in English, right? So like, and I didn't appreciate for people to make fun of me when I spoke English. So I don't want people to make fun of other people when they're trying to speak Spanish because that's just, us trying. So do you feel, that anxiety now that you've been in the U.S.
Yeah,
longer?
I feel like I focused so much on perfecting my English that I became like one of those grammar Nazis. And like my friends will tell you, like I used to be that friend that's like, oh, it's actually anyway, not anyways. Like I would call people out like, yeah, like, oh, it's actually spelled like this, or you're using, and it's so annoying, right? Because it's like, all right, like you know what I'm saying, like you don't need to correct me. And eventually I think I like sort of caught myself, because I was like, that's actually like shitty of me to do. Porque no todo mundo tiene las mismas experiencias, no todo mundo aprende. Mucha gente, o sea, crecen y sus papás hablan así y ellos eso así aprenden, entonces a veces es cultural también. And I had to like sort of snap myself out of that because I was like, I will hear someone like say something wrong and I'm like, all right, whatever, you know, like that's their like way of speaking.
Honestly, that's so nice of you to think about that because it's true. Like even in Mexico, I remember when I started hanging out with like the, you know, the con los fresas, you know, like los pepones que decíamos nosotros, you know, because I grew up in el barrio, you know, like my friends, it was completely different. And then cuando empecé a ir a la high school en México, a la prepa, mis amigos con los que me empecé a juntar en la prepa eran con familias pues eran más populares, con más dinero quizás, ¿sabes? Diferentes, tenían acceso a otras cosas que yo no tenía, o quizá tenía pero nunca las utilicé, ¿no? Entonces me acuerdo cuando me empezaban a corregir, yo después venía y corregía a mis papás, o a mis primos, o a mis amigos, and it's like, it was pretty fucked up because I didn't like when they did it to me, and then I was out here doing it to other people, you know. But then, same thing with the grammar. Like to this day, I'm so afraid of being discovered that I am not from here through the way I write. That I am obsessed with like where commas go, where
the Oxford comma. I'm a fan.
Better. It's like. It's so stressful to live with that, you know, like I mean I tell you this, ahorita todavía escribo un email, ¿no? Para mi trabajo, un email importante que se lo voy a mandar a 30 personas, quizá en un rango más arriba que yo. To this day, after 14 years in the US, I still use Google Translate to translate it from English to Spanish to see if it sounds like correct. And I'm like, okay, that sounds pretty good. And then now I'm better, and now I'm like, fuck it, you know, they understand. Like, dude, I wouldn't have made it this far, you know. Like, it's not like I'm faking my way through, you know. Like, fuck it. Like,
do you ever do this thing where like, because I do it in both English and Spanish, but let's say I'm like sending a message to someone and I use a word that I'm like, okay, I'm not sure if I'm using it in the right context. So I send it and then I go to Google and I'm like, what does this word mean?
I just did it con epítome, you know, like it's just like, but I do it in English so much, you know, like in Spanish I don't care, but like in English, man, every time I need to look it up, and I ask people like, I'm like, did I use that correctly? Because that's the first time.
But to your point, I think I am very self-conscious if I'm trying to have a conversation in just Spanish, because I now have a very limited Spanish vocabulary. Like, I'm fluent, but, por ejemplo, si estoy teniendo una conversación con alguien, me trabo mucho. Si no puedo usar Spanglish, or I just don't want to, and I'm trying to, like, just have the conversation in Spanish, me trabo mucho. And I'm like, ¿cómo se dice? Cuando visito a mi familia en México, se me hace más difícil comunicarme.
Se traba la lengua. Se te lengua la traba. Y en México tan ojetes que son, ¿no? Cuando se te sale un o un so.
Sí,
la gringa.
Ya te crees gringa. No, me acuerdo que al principio iba a visitar a mi familia en México y de repente se me salían palabras así como en inglés, ¿verdad? Me acuerdo mucho de una vez que estaba hablando de eyeliner. No sé qué le estaba diciendo a mi tía, de que, sí, me maquillo, pero me pongo un poquito rímel y me quedé así como, y le digo, ¿y eyeliner? Y me dice, no se dice, me dice, si vas a hablar español, habla español. No seas,
pues
y es que ya
tía,
les molesta si empiezas a aventarles palabras en inglés, pero también, o sea, lo entiendo porque les avientas palabras en inglés como si las entienden. And sometimes they're like, what are you saying? Like, my sister does the so a lot. Like, no estaba haciendo esto, so... Yeah. Entonces hice esto.
Sí, pero ¿sabes? A lo mejor, ahora se puede entender porque a lo mejor, como no saben, se sienten que no son, antes de decirlo, tengo que decir, se pueden sentir como menos inteligentes o se pueden sentir como, no, si ya sabes que no entiendo, ¿para qué me lo dices? ¿No? Como que estás queriendo sentirte más arriba y si supieran que en realidad lo estás haciendo
no
porque
sé.
no sabes, ¿sabes? O sea, si, like, no, es que no sé cómo hacerlo. Y no, yo pienso que, obviamente, pues, depende cómo tú te sientas, ¿no? Pero como yo algo que me ha ayudado así es decirle a la gente, ¿sabes qué? La neta, no sé cómo decirlo. I don't know how to say that. How do you say it? Like, it's just, people would understand, I think, sometimes. I think we're better at it. But, you know, like, again, that, you know, no sabo thing, it pisses me off, you know. Es como decir paisa, no sé, ¿verdad? No sé cómo lo veas tú, pero me gustaría saber tu punto de vista. Cuando llegué aquí, a mí me gusta usar botas y me gusta usar bajo piteado y así como me puedo vestir de traje pero en la oficina, también me gusta vestirme de botas para ir a un rodeo, ¿no? O cosas así. Y cuando recién llegué me decían, no manches, te ves bien paisita o te ves bien paisa. Y decía, güey, pues, ¿es eso bueno o es malo? ¿No? Y después me di cuenta que pues no era tan positivo, era algo culero, era que te dijeron te ves paisa, era como que te ves, no sé, que no se me hacía, pues bien. ¿Qué opinas de la palabra paisa?
Sí, no sé si sea... Porque cuando tú dices paisa, por ejemplo, yo pienso en la palabra beaner, ¿verdad? Donde crecí había mucho colorismo. Sí es colorismo en español, ¿verdad? Colorismo. Um, y, like, it's crazy, right? Because this town is full of Mexican people. Pero depende de qué tan moreno seas. It's like a hierarchy, or I don't know. And I remember, like, people would, like, tease each other and call each other beaner and stuff, and I always found that so offensive. But at the same time, I'm like, you're also Mexican. Like, if you go to Dallas, even though you're, like, lighter skinned, someone might call you a beaner. So it's just, you know, very relative to, like, where you are and stuff.
¿Cómo te sentías en la high school cuando estabas aquí? ¿Querías participar en todo o no querías hacer nada?
Yeah, para cuando yo estaba en high school, ya estaba más involucrada en como la sociedad, ¿verdad? De la escuela y todo. En sexto, yo me metí a un grupo de baile de mi escuela.
Okay. ¿Qué tipo de baile?
It was like choreography dances, so like kick dances, hip hop,
Oh,
jazz,
cool.
like all these, and then we would have like our nationals, like competitions and stuff. So there's this like show on Netflix now, Cheer. And even though it's cheerleading, it reminds me of like those times, you know, because we also like got ready for nationals and everything. But
I have to share that when I moved here, like I thought, because I've seen all those movies in Mexico, you know, like I ate it all where, it's like an old joke that I tell, like it's just, I wanted to do that too. It seemed like all the cool kids did it, you know, like that's hip hop and like choreography.
yeah, and honestly, like I'm not gonna lie, like that gave me a lot of that like social proof, I guess, like by being
Right.
on the dance team and sort of being like one of the cool kids in a way. So I had like
Right,
I had
absolutely.
an amazing high school experience. Like I was sad to graduate.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people struggle because they feel out of place. But by the time I was in high school, like I had my little group of friends, like, you know, the sort of like popular. I was like a social butterfly, and by the time I was in high school, and
Okay.
I was like one of those people that would tell my dad, like, you know, like in Hispanic households, it's like sales el viernes o sales el sábado. Like you're not going
Sí,
out
sí,
every
sí.
night, honey.
Sí, hell
Y
yeah.
le decía a mi papá, oh, puedo ir a una cena de cumpleaños, blah, 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 like on Friday, right? Y salía y al otro día le decía, puedo ir a una fiesta de unos amigos. Y me decía, ya saliste ayer. And I'm like, yeah, but that was with a different group of friends. I'm like,
I'm that
yeah,
popular,
I'm like,
Dad.
I'm sorry
You
that you
gotta
have
get
a
it.
popular daughter. No, yeah, but I just like wanted to like be friends with everyone, and so
That's, and were you like that in Mexico? Before you moved, were you also a social butterfly in your own
yeah,
words?
I think I remember like in elementary school, like I was really close friends with like the it girl, if you will, at like
Right.
8 years old, right? But she was like the
Yo, there is a
she
girl
was
for
like
sure.
the it girl, and I was like her best friend. So I guess yeah, like
Wow.
in my, that's why I took it so hard because I moved to the U.S. and then I was like in my mind like a nobody, and like I had to figure out, you know, how to get along with these kids that all spoke English and I didn't.
In one of your episodes, you talk about being, an introvert that turns into an extrovert. Not you, but like people in general. Do you consider yourself like an introvert that, kind of like makes up by being extra outgoing?
So I love talking about this because most people who meet me or know of me or whatever, they will straight up say like, you're an extrovert. There's no question about it. You're an extrovert. But I like, through my own research and reading and whatever, I'm like, no, because I always need to like replenish my energy when I spend time with people
100%.
or like I will go out and be the social butterfly, right? And like be the clown. I like to make people laugh. I am very like out there, like easygoing. But then the next day I'm like, I need to be alone all day because I'm like drained, So
Because it's a job. If you think about it, someone needs to do it, and that someone needs to be you for your
someone
groups,
needs to make
right?
them laugh. No, but I like tell people about the term pseudo extrovert, which is like in certain contexts, like you can make yourself act like an extrovert, but that doesn't mean that like to your core you're an extrovert.
Are.
Like I like my alone time. That's when I do the most like thinking. That's when I'm the most creative. Like, so extroverts always need to be around people. They're always, full of energy. And I'm like, no, I'm not. It might look
Sabes
like
que tengo dos preguntas para ti hablando de eso porque me relaciono bastante contigo en ese aspecto. O sea, te lo juro, pues sabes, ser como la conexión y hacer a la gente reír, estar viendo de persona en persona, ¿sabes? A ver, dos cosas. La primera es, y creo que estoy de acuerdo contigo en eso de ser, ¿sabes? Como en todo lo que hacemos, por ejemplo, como estamos hablando hace rato, que los dos estamos crudos, ¿no? Yo fui a una boda, tú fuiste a un picnic. Entonces, si tú sales a tomar, entonces, tú, you're going to drink, y te vas a divertir, te vas a desvelar, vas a tomar. Entonces, el siguiente día, you have to balance that out, right? And you're going to feel your worst, and then to be in the middle again. And then you go all drinking again, and then all the way to the bottom, and then to the middle. I like to think about it that way, because si fueras extrovertida 100%, it would be the other way. Like, you would have to go out to feel balanced, right? So, like, you wouldn't necessarily, so, like, after going out, you wouldn't need to be alone to be in the middle again. It would be the other way. Does that make sense?
No, yeah,
I think it's kind of confusing.
100%.
You would replenish your energy by going and meeting people, and then you wouldn't be tired at the end of the day. Quite the opposite. You'd be like, oh my God, what an amazing time I had. I can't wait to do it again tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. Like there are people who, or even like, it's funny, right? Because like I will go out and I'm like up here, like my energy. But if I woke up early that day, like by midnight, 1 a.m., ya estoy muerta. I'm like yawning.
Sí.
And other people are like, oh, like, what's the move? Where are we going? And I'm like, I'm going home to sleep. Like, I'm exhausted.
Yeah. Cálmate, Juan. Oye, pero no, entonces no te gusta levantarte temprano. You're not an early riser?
I'm struggling so much because with my new job, it's like, very 9 to 5-ish. So that's great. But I have to go in every day. And now that's a struggle because now I have to wake up extra early, get ready. And I'm a night owl. So even if I wake up early, like, I'm not going to sleep earlier.
There's this book that it would be, I mean, I know you like reading. You recommend a book almost every episode of your podcast. And there's a book by Steven Pink, I think that's his name. It's called The Perfect Timing, the Scientific Method of, I don't know if you heard about like scientific method of perfect timing, something like that. But it basically tells you, depending on the person that you are, if you like, he calls him a Stark. Is it like the normal person, then the night owl, and then some other bird is like the early riser, right? So like most of us are 7 a.m. people, 6:30, 7 a.m. Then there are people that perform their best after 10, 11 p.m. Then they go all night, and then they have a really hard time, waking up in the morning. And then there are those that perform their best from like 7 to 12, and then they're really tired by 7. So like I think it's a good book, because I know you in one of your episodes you said like you have to put like 8-10 alarms to be able to wake up in the morning.
I stay snoozing. I snooze my alarm every morning.
It's so crazy.
So dangerous too. But
Oh
yeah.
yeah, it's but you're living your life at the edge. Like so, now this is another thing. This is the second part of my earlier question. De alguna manera, ¿crees que el trauma que has vivido en tu vida, como siendo una persona, sabes, o sea, viviste en México y en Estados Unidos varias veces, antes de tener 8 años, tus papás se separaron en algún momento, y luego te vienes otra vez y tienes que volverte alguien que en realidad no necesariamente eras, sabes, te convertiste en alguien más, y crees que de alguna manera usas ese trauma y la persona que eres, que te gusta hacer a la gente reír, que te gusta socializar, que lo puedes utilizar como kind of like to hide that, to like kind of like as a counter to the trauma that you had?
Yeah, like I think you mean like to make up for the trauma, right?
Yeah, so usually like traumatic experiences, think of all comedians. Most of them. There are some that are like the outliers that had like the best life.
Yeah.
They were rich and they became comedians. But like most of the comedians and the people that like making people laugh are people that aren't necessarily, they're traumatized.
Yeah.
Somehow. So what do you think about that?
I definitely think that so these days, right, I've done a lot of like inner work in terms of like working through my feelings and my traumas, and I went to therapy last year or earlier this year, and so I'm very self-aware now. Like I know exactly who I am, I know exactly what my traumas are, I know what I need to feel fulfilled, so all these things, right? But I do think that I have that type of personality, kind of like the class clown, if you will, because I avoid like hard topics or I hate confrontation. I'm super non-confrontational, and some people might think that I am, but I would rather just like deal with my emotions by making jokes about it. And so I do think that I developed that personality because of my lived experiences. And I also like...
Are you the oldest?
No.
Are you the oldest?
I'm the young.
You're not?
So I'm the youngest of 3 from same mom, same dad, and I have several half siblings. So counting all my siblings, I'm sort of like in the middle.
Okay. Sorry for interrupting.
No, but I think it's like even like with my TikTok, right? Like making TikToks about my bad work experiences helped me get through my days. Because it was like, at least I'm like, putting a twist to it, and like, other people can relate or other people can laugh about it. So yeah, it's definitely like, it takes more for me to like feel something and then be like, okay, I need to like deal with these emotions. Like, let me talk to someone or something. It's so like, I can easily like turn something into a joke. So it's definitely, it's like a defense mechanism,
you have that
100%.
And actually, that's a best way to put it, right? So is your personality or some parts of it a defense mechanism to the trauma that you experienced? Yeah. Should have said it like that from the beginning. I went, rambling around, but thank you for clarifying that. No, that's because I think about my experiences, and I'm trying to make them into jokes nowadays, right? Like I've been doing stand-up comedy a little bit, and like just writing out those experiences to make them funny, so that getting attention of the people that wouldn't necessarily look at them. Right? It's like about living in the hood and like, going to hospitals in poor neighborhoods. Like rich people won't come to these hospitals, but like if we make it funny, maybe they'll fucking listen to like what that experience and then be like, oh shit, does that really happen? So. Okay, you talk about your TikTok. Let's talk about your TikTok because you are awesome. Seriously, no, la verdad.
Gracias.
En cuanto hace como 3 meses o 2 meses te vi en TikTok y me morí de la risa porque yo no trabajo en Corporate America, but I work in,
like the office job or
Politics America. Yeah. I work in politics, and a lot of those are very, very similar. It's so I laugh out loud every time. And so tienes un TikTok. Sofía tiene un TikTok que se llama You're Corporate Latina. That's who you are. Your podcast is called Corporate Pero Latinos.
And my TikTok is Corporate Pero Latina.
Do you want to talk about your TikTok? How did it come to be? Like, how do you start?
So I actually started my TikTok out of like, one of my friends told me, like, she knew that I was into like the stock market and everything. And she was like, you should start a TikTok and try to like educate people, right? Without, you know, like men make it so hard with all the financial terms and whatever, and so it's hard for a lot of people to understand if they didn't study finance. Yeah, like they make it hard on purpose, and like it's really not that hard to understand like the basics of the stock market or like of investing and stuff like that, like compounding, all these things, right? It's like a lot of people, you say compounding and they're like, what the fuck is that, like?
Yeah.
But she was like, yeah, and you know, just do it for like to cater to like women to understand, or like Latinos, right, who might not have that knowledge, like whatever. And so I sort of started doing that, but it wasn't like as fun for me to post those things, and I wasn't really like growing because of it. And then, you know, my For You page, which is where you get like, you know, the algorithm works somehow, and like whatever is of interest to you comes out.
They figure it out.
Yeah, they just figure it out. But my For You page was filled with like corporate jokes in a way, or people like in corporate who had accounts that made videos like that. Dating and like first gen Latino struggles, like all this stuff, but like either like emotional, like inspirational, or funny. And I remember like seeing all these things, right? And especially the corporate ones, there are some really big accounts that like post all these jokes and whatever, and they're basically like content creators, right? But most of them are white. Like I was relating to all this content, but I was like, okay, but that's only like part of our experience in corporate America. Like I can relate to the videos where it's like, oh, you know, like emailing and like leaving work at 5 and your boss calls you and you freak out, like all those things. But then I'm like, there are so many things that we Latinos experience working in corporate America that like I'm not seeing on TikTok. And I'm like, I wish someone was like putting it out there, like making me laugh because I can relate to that stuff, right?
Right.
And so I sort of started experimenting with that and like making videos about that, and like a little bit of dating and like the first gen struggle, like all in one. And I had 2 videos that like went viral like back to back.
Right.
And
you
I think
have
that's
one with
where
like
I think that's like the when it started, like when I started gaining a following, and then more of my videos were like started going viral. And so I was just like, oh shit, like this is, I like truly enjoy making videos and posting them on TikTok and like making people laugh, or making people feel inspired, or like, oh, you know, she's going through this, so like I can get through it, like she got through it. Like just, it's not just like jokes. Like I very much made it a point to not put on my bio like, oh, this is all fictional, because it's not. Like a lot of the jokes are.
You're very brave, seriously. Like someone, I mean, I have some experiences like that, you know, working where I work, but I am afraid that if I post anything like that, like, and I shouldn't be, right? So like, it's just, you, like, seriously, props to you, because those are so close to what you do, you know, like, and they're real, right?
Yeah, so it's like my true experiences, and it's hard because I am like afraid every day to like show up to work and have my boss call me in and say like, hey, I found your TikTok, like what's going on?
Maybe they did already, you know. Pero la verdad, yo pienso que todos los empleadores deberían estar agradecidos cuando hay alguien en su equipo que es un creador de contenido y que tiene un following tan grande como tú. Tienes alrededor de 14,000 tantos en TikTok, más tus seguidores de Instagram, ¿sabes? Tu podcast. El trabajo que estás haciendo está súper chingón, la verdad. Yo pienso que no soy el único que lo ve, que estás haciendo. O sea, que de verdad estás trayendo nuestra experiencia. Empezaste tu podcast, está tu cuenta de TikTok, tu cuenta de Instagram, y ahora tienes un grupo en Nueva York de Corporate Pero Latinos que se juntan de vez en cuando. Ayer fueron a un picnic. O sea, ¿cómo tienes tanto tiempo y cómo te organizas para hacer estas cosas?
Mucha organización, y ahora me da risa porque a mis amigos o familia les... Like, I joke around, right? And I'm like, oh, like, my people will talk to your people. Or like, oh, let me check my calendar because it's full. but it's like jokingly, but my calendar really is like crazy. And like I go into work every day, right? And it's like my 9 to 5, and between 9 to 5 it's like work.
Nothing.
I can't work on Corporate Pero Latina. And I mean, I do post like stories or like here and there, like, you know, social media, but it's not like I can be creating content or like planning an event. So that's like time that's blocked.
That takes 40 hours out of your week.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's hard because sometimes, so I took this job to make sure that I would have time outside of that to work on everything else that I'm doing, which is the fulfilling part of my life. Like my 9 to 5, I was talking to my friends about it the other day. I'm like, my 9 to 5 is my bill payer. It's not really like my passion, but it's still hard because sometimes, you know, it's like a Monday and I'm like, oh, I need to like edit this podcast, right? And I'm sure you know, like it's very time consuming.
It's very time consuming.
I get home from work and I know that I have to do that, but I'm like, I'm so sleepy or I'm so tired. Like all I want to do is like lie down. But I like wanted to do this, you know? So that's sort of like what gets me to like, all right, just do it. Because I'm like, it's kind of like, bitch, you asked for this. Like, and I kind of started the podcast like on a whim. Like I quit my job in January and I was like, oh, this is a perfect day to start a podcast. Because it's like that first episode of like, I quit my soul-sucking job without a bag of money. You know,
great title,
like,
by the way.
It
That's
gets
a
like
great
people
title.
interested. But I didn't know like how time consuming it was going to be. So that's one thing. For TikTok and Instagram, when I was working from home, I could take 15 minutes and like record a video and post it. Now I have to be more of like a batch content creator where like on the weekends or like when I get home from work or something, I have to record like 3 at a time so that I have enough content to like pump out during the week on my platforms. Right. And it's hard because sometimes like I don't get around to doing it. So it's like Wednesday and I'm like, oh shit, I'm all out of content. Like, oh.
And it's like being out of money, right? Because that's the way you're growing.
So now through those platforms, right? Like sometimes I get brand deals. But people sometimes think that it's like, oh, they reach out, they tell you like, make this video and you do it and you get paid and that's it. But no, it's like so much back and forth. Sometimes there's like Zoom calls, like intro Zoom call and then talk about this and emailing back and forth and setting up your account on their platform. Like so much stuff that like goes on in the background and then like actually recording the video, editing it. So that takes a lot of time too. And then with the New York City Corporate Latinos, it's this group that I created out of pure selfishness. Like I was looking for a group of friends that I could relate to. And all of a sudden
I don't agree. I don't think you're selfish. I think you're the smartest person because of that. You know, this is something that I talked about it, you know, in a recent episode that I posted on networking and, you know, the power of that, right? But it's not so. Your network isn't just the people that you work with. It's like this group of people that you need to find that are gonna elevate you to the next level, right? It's like people that are hungry, that are motivated, that have the same interests, you know, that are willing to share and not be selfish, like rather than being this person, be like, they're happy, you know, te aplauden cuando es algo chingón. Y es el grupo que tú hiciste, o sea, cuando los veo digo, chingado, quisiera estar en Nueva York.
So many people told me that, like, they messaged me from, like, LA or SF or something. They're like, oh my God, I wish I lived in New York City so I could go to these events.
No, y más que nada, porque creo que está habiendo un cambio. Hay muchísimos latinos ahorita en Nueva York, pero que ahora se están viendo, ¿sabes? O sea, que hayas creado este grupo abre como estas puertas para saber, okay, there's a shit ton of us. We're not lonely that we thought we were. I would have never imagined, you know, that because you know some of the people that you follow that I see in your stories. I'm like, okay, I follow that person too. That's so cool that you know that you're able to click and work together. I love that. That's
yeah,
cool.
You know, I think yesterday I brought this up with a couple of the girls. I was talking about how like when you look at our group and like the people that consistently show up to the events and stuff, there are so many of us. And it's like, oh shit, like there really are so many corporate Latinos. Like the representation is out there, but it's hard to see it, and it's hard to feel like yeah, we're all, you know, making a change or like representing or whatever, because we're all sprinkled throughout like all these different companies and stuff. So you go to work every day and you feel lonely because you don't see anyone that looks like you, or you can't relate. And I think that's why it's so important to like have these communities, right? And I think, you know, in any podcast that I do, like with people, and they ask me about it, I will forever say, like, this is the best thing that I have ever done through, like, it's like the best way in which I could have used my platform. And this is exactly like what I wanted someone to do for me, and it was never out there. So I'm like, all right, I will create it. But now it's also very difficult to like keep it going. I remember when it first started, someone was like, hey, if you ever need help like organizing or something, blah blah blah, right, like let me know, because I see a lot of these groups that like get started and then they die out because
they don't
no
continue.
one is like keeping it going, you know. And so these groups need those people that like really care about, you know, the
need a leader
working like planning the events, or like constantly engaging, right? Because it's not just the events, it's like we have a whole Discord and like all these threads. I like always mention this too, because when we have events, you always see us like out drinking and dancing, like that's all you see, right? But I'm like, nobody has any idea as to like what really happens like on the daily. Like we have all these like, I guess, professional like conversations going on like daily, and people are like, hey, like I'm job seeking, or hey, if someone can help me on my resume, hey,
100%.
I'm like currently trying to move, like any recommendations for like this borough, or like the guys, I don't know if this is like too TMI, but the guys have their own Discord group, and one of their threads is like mental health. And when I saw that, because I didn't create it, I saw that and I was like, I love that like someone thought to create this thread to at least try and talk about it, you know, especially being a Latino man. Like Latino men have this idea of like, oh, you can't be soft. You gotta, no mental health talk here. So no, yeah, I love it.
Oh, I had a point to make and I forgot what it was, which, you know, it should come back later. No, but I thank you for that. And, you know, I know, si alguna vez alguna duda sale de Sacramento, de California, count on me. I would love to help in any way I can. Y, ¿sabes? Lo que dices es cierto. Todo el mundo puede tener la idea, todo el mundo puede hacerlo una vez, pero tú lo sigues haciendo. O sea, si de verdad te estás uniendo al grupo, estás convirtiéndote en ese glue que necesitamos todos los latinos en diferentes partes, ¿sabes? O sea, y que puedan compartir, y eso es a lo que me refería antes, ¿no? Que te decía que todos tenemos la posibilidad de crear nuestro propio grupo de amigos, pero a veces pensamos que ya nuestros amigos que tenemos que está bien, o sea, está bien tener tus amigos de toda la vida, ¿no? Pero muchas veces las metas que tenemos con nuestro mejor amigo o con nuestros hermanos son completamente diferentes, y creemos que no nos podemos ir porque está mal o you know, it's not fair or whatever, but it's not fair to you to not go and find these friends that are going to help you out too. You know, it's not fair to your future. And talking about your future, I have another question on... Hiciste un casting por internet para I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. And I just want to talk about that briefly, you know, like if you want to.
Yeah.
But it's just so cool that you're just throwing like, you're putting yourself out there any way that you can. How was that experience? How do you like it? You know, how do you do it?
So I feel like now that I have a platform with, I guess, like a big enough following, I want to like showcase, like, you know, go out there, like just live your life. Like if you've always wanted to try something, like just do it. Like who cares if you're not good at it, you know? Like those are like the most like inspiring people, the ones that go out there and like just give it a shot just for fun. And it's funny because growing up, like, I was always like the planner. Ever since high school, like, I was like, this is gonna be my career. I'm gonna like be in corporate. I'm gonna, make so much money. And I was like money hungry. And then, eventually I'll get married and like maybe have kids. But it was just like, this is gonna be my life, without thinking about like, oh, it might not happen that way. Like, things happen.
Yeah, you want, like, this is my timeline.
Yeah, I was
right?
like on the timeline.
Fuck, we're gonna get it
I
done.
remember I was dating this guy that like, I was majoring in accounting, right? And he was like, oh, like, he was like just so judgmental about it. Like, oh, I just don't see that for you. Like, it's not very you, like me being an accountant, like working in an office. And I got so defensive. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, no, this, like, I'm made to be like the corporate like girl that works in an office, But like, he had a point. Like, that's not me.
Yeah, that's true.
But at that point, I was like, how dare you? So I was just always a planner, and I didn't want to deviate from any of that. And I think that when I realized that I was so miserable at my finance job and I quit because I was just that, I like could not.
You quit, like, on your tracks. You didn't have another job, nothing.
I was
were like, fuck it.
So in finance, right, you go through month end close, and it was like hell, at least where I was at. And I remember just being like, I cannot go through one more month end close. I was literally like, I cannot. I will cry again. And so it was like 3 weeks until that point, right? And for a whole week, I was like, oh my God, like, I don't know what to do. Like, I just, I was like, I do not want to go through this process one more time. And I always like, ask for my siblings for advice and stuff. And I was telling them, like, I just can't, like, I really want to quit, but I'm freaking out. And my brother was like, you will always figure it out. Like, if you're that miserable, just quit. Like, why are you staying if it's making you panic? Like, and
right. So,
that was kind of like the little push, but I had no job lined up. I had no idea what I wanted to do after this job, and I just quit. And I gave my 2 weeks notice, but I was like, this is my 2 weeks notice. And
right on time, right before 2 weeks before they
right before monthly.
That's funny.
Yeah, I was like, I'm sorry, but I'm out. And so I quit, and then of course, I posted about it, and I was freaking out, and everyone was being so supportive, which was very surprising. Like, a lot of people will think that that's like something stupid to do, but I was like, oh shit, okay. And it was very inspiring to, like, there were older people commenting saying like, good for you. Like, go out there and find out like what you want to do, because I wish that I would have had the guts to do this when I was in my 20s. And now I have a whole family and people that depend on me. So I'm stuck, working the job that I have.
Yeah,
like, I can't just quit. Like, people depend on me.
Me pones nervioso, cuando dices todo eso. Like, I mean, I'm in my 30s. I mean, 31. I forget sometimes that I'm 31 now. And I feel exactly the same way, like, it's just, going back to what you were saying, the way you outline your life y la manera en que veías y dijiste, voy a hacer esto, luego voy a hacer esto, luego voy a hacer esto, y yo voy a hacer, Miss Corporate Latina. You would have, it would have been totally different, right? If si hubiera funcionado, te emocionaba trabajar en corporate. Yo decía que por mucho tiempo dije que quería ser político, ¿sabes? O sea, pero porque quería cambiar
the system.
El mundo, literal, o sea, y todavía quiero, o sea, yo todavía ser parte de ese cambio de alguna manera, ¿verdad? Empecé a trabajar donde trabajo ahorita y ahorita sí digo, I don't know, like, politics is fun, but I think there is other ways to change the world.
Yeah, definitely.
Rather than like having to go through politics, so, thank you for that. And entonces, a la gente que nos está escuchando, go and do it.
Fuck it up.
And,
I think, like, so that's what a lot of people get from me, I guess, like, that little push just from seeing that I'm like, oh yeah, like, one of my friends saw that I was auditioning for like the other role right now for I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter, and she's like, girl, I cannot keep up with you, like, what? But yeah, I'm just like doing all these things, and it's like, what's the worst that could happen? Like, they say no, and I'm like, okay,
Fuck it.
cool, go back to my regular life. Like, but imagine if like they were to see it and be like, hey, we want to cast you, like, what fucking life changing, you know? So my thing is just like, uno nunca sabe. Like, why not just like shoot your
Uno
shot
nunca
for
sabe.
whatever that you feel like you want to try or do. So yeah, I think, I guess it's like for my own personal interest, like just figuring out like what to do and like opportunities that open up and whatever, but also just trying to like push people to be more
To get it done,
risky with their
motivate people to take
with their
action.
life,
Yeah.
because we at the end of the day, you're not going to be like on your deathbed thinking like, oh yeah, like I loved my office job, like that was the best life.
Ya, te voy a compartir algo que compartí en algún episodio que me encanta y por eso lo digo tanto, raza. Ya sé, ya lo han escuchado un chingo de veces, pero I need to share with Sophia, ¿ok? Es acerca de este señor que trabajaba en Corporate America. He was an accountant. He was like the most, the best accountant in the world. He wasn't, but I'm making it up to be, so that he relates to you. Era un contador, el contador más chingón, tenía una mujer súper guapa, 3 hijos, todo, sus hijos también super successful, He was like the accountant, he was like super famous all over the world, people respected him, y ya cuando se iba a morir, le preguntaron, oye, Frank, let's call him Frank, y le preguntaron, y si pudieras vivir toda tu vida otra vez, ¿qué hicieras? Y dice, ¿o qué cambiaras? Y dice, sería la persona que siempre quise ser, pero nunca fui. Right, so like you're talking about like the most successful person that you can think of, right? Like, and even him was like, I would have been, that person that I always wanted to be, but I never was, and that hit me. I read this 10 years ago, and I'm still fucking trying to figure it out, right? But on this note, I want to close out with something that you said on one of your podcasts and talk about the sunk cost
The
fallacy.
sunk cost fallacy, yeah.
Would you please tell the audience what that is and what is
So
important?
I don't remember the exact definition now because I definitely looked it up.
I was laughing out loud because I heard about it on economics before, and you said that you were like, "Yeah, I coined that term." I was like, "What the?" And then you laughed.
Yeah,
pretty
like
funny.
that. Like, if I could have coined any term, like I would have coined that one. But so the sunk cost fallacy basically implies, right? Like, so a lot of times we spend a lot of resources, whether it be time or money or energy, on something, right? Whether that's like your job, your marriage, your I don't know, anything. your fitness life, like
Whatever,
education, anything.
Yeah.
And so you get to a point where you might be like, oh my God, I no longer want to do this, or I no longer want to pursue this. I no longer want to be in this relationship. I no longer want this job. But you feel sort of stuck because it's sort of that saying, right, where you're like, well, I've already spent so much time working on this, like I can't just quit now. Or for me, the biggest thing was like I took out so much money in student loans to get that accounting degree, to have that corporate job. How dare I like try to quit all that after having taken out like that much money and having gone through like I had to do 5 for accounting, but like 5 full years of college to not even use my degree. But people don't think about like, like you lived all those experiences. Like there are so many transferable skills. There are so many things that you learned from those experiences. So it's not time wasted. It's not money wasted. But people see it that way. So the sunk cost fallacy is like you feel like you'll be wasting the money or the energy or the time if you just quit whatever you're doing. And it keeps a lot of people stuck.
Y por eso quería que lo mencionaras, porque justo acabamos de hablar de eso, ¿verdad? De decir, esas personas que tienen 30, 35, 40 años, que quizás sienten que ya su vida se acabó, que ya tengo 10 años en este trabajo, ¿cómo me voy a salir si ya soy tan bueno haciendo lo que hago, pero no estoy feliz? Pues tienes la chance. ¿Por qué me impactó cuando lo hablaste? Porque yo lo había escuchado in economic terms, but that made sense. But then when I think about it as a Latino or, Latinx, like an immigrant person, so now it's not only my efforts and my money and, my time that I've wasting, and I'm paraphrasing, like I'm doing air quotes right now because it's not wasting, like Sophia said. Now it's also los esfuerzos de mis papás, ¿sabes? Y que llegaron aquí, entonces te empiezas a cuestionar todo el tiempo, dices, no mames, ¿cómo me voy a rajar ahorita ya? Si ya le eché tanto esfuerzo y mis papás se vinieron para acá. Pues si no eres feliz, cabrón, o si no eres feliz, morra, you have to do it. Tus papás te trajeron aquí para que fueras feliz por ti, no por ellos. Pues cada quien está viviendo su propia vida y tenemos nosotros que, obviamente, no vayas y mates a alguien porque tu papá se va a enojar, ¿no? Pero si lo que estás haciendo... no nomás tu papá, ¿sabes? O sea, hasta yo, raza, no asesinen. Pero... Eso, ellos también quieren que seas feliz, que no sea por lo que las otras personas esperan de ti, que no tomes ese paso, que no vayas y hagas ese casting, que no te subas al escenario para hacer stand-up, que no empieces un podcast, que no sea por lo que las otras personas esperan de ti. Y los esfuerzos que ya hiciste o el dinero que ya te gastaste, después se va a recuperar tenfold. If what you're going to be doing, it's what you love to do.
Yeah.
Right? What do you think?
Hasta me dieron escalofríos ahorita que estabas hablando de eso, porque creo que fue en ese episodio en el que lo mencioné, que muchas veces como like first gen children, nosotros queremos sobresalir y hacer like make our parents proud, basically. And to them, they don't have our like US lived experiences. So to them, they attach like success to money and rank, right? In like the hierarchy of corporate America or a society. And so
they associate their success with the name of the company that you're working for.
Yeah, I used to work at KPMG, which is one of the big four accounting firms, like right out of college. And that was my first like big girl job. And when I wanted to leave that company to go to a smaller one, my mom was so concerned. She's like, oh, but all the benefits. And then like my family in Mexico used to love being able to tell their friends or like acquaintances like, oh yeah, like she works for KPMG, because KPMG is global, so it's very well recognized like all over. So they're like, oh yeah, she's an accountant like at KPMG, like this big firm, and to them that's like status,
So your status is like elevating everyone, and it's like
yes.
Hay este chico que está haciendo este podcast, se llama ¿Quién tú eres? Plural. Algo dice él que él tenía miedo de dejar TikTok por el estatus de decir trabajo en TikTok, ¿no? Pero no era feliz.
No, yeah, but it's because a lot of times that's what like holds you back from quitting a job that you hate, because you're like, okay, but it gives me like the status, I don't know.
And it's so important for us, like, we need to find a way. Estoy leyendo ahorita este libro se llama You Sound Like a White Girl. I don't know if you've heard about this book. Oh man, I recommend it. If there is a book that I recommend that I've been telling all my friends about, is this book, especially, immigrants or children of immigrants. But it's like everything that we need to give up, who we are literally at some point in our life to be able to fit in corporate America or in politics.
No, I agree. It's I know like exactly what you're talking about, like the Plural podcast. Like I remember hearing his story and I was like, yes, that's 100% I can relate to it, because I went through that. Like you don't see many Latinas in finance, especially not in New York City and like big name companies. So to me, it was like an ego thing. Like for me to tell people like, oh, I work here, I'm a financial analyst. Like, people see you as like, oh shit, like you're smart or like whatever. Yeah. And
oh my God,
like you're an outlier, right, in the Latino community. And I had like so much pride in that. But I always like, I loved talking about what I did, but I didn't like my job. I was like, whatever. Yeah. I mean, I guess to kind of like close it off, right? I on my last podcast episode, I actually spoke about that, how it gave me like status and pride and whatever, but I always thought that like the only way of like me representing Latinos was by being the finance girl and in corporate America.
Wow.
Because I'm like, you don't see us here, like I have to do it for us, or like I'm sure all the Latinas in tech feel that way because they're like 2% of like the Latinas in tech. So you have this, you feel this pressure to like not leave because there are already so few of us.
It's my responsibility, right?
Yeah, and so to me it was like I'm responsible like for our representation in this industry.
How do you feel now?
Well, so that's like what I talked about. There is this book called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. Yeah, I'm like, shit.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about it, yeah.
And it's great. And there's this one chapter where he talks about, like, who you are in society, right? We have connectors, we have salesmen, and, like, another one. But what got me really interested was, like, the section about the connectors. Because he's like, a lot of people, like these people are so important in our communities because they're the ones that somehow end up being a part of so many different groups, so many communities, so many niches. And they're the ones that are able to connect people, to like lift people by connecting people, And I read this book years ago, but lately, I've been thinking about that whole like representation thing or whatever. And I'm like, wait, this is like, I feel like this is my calling, being a connector and being that person that brings people together, that creates networks, the social butterfly, all these things.
Yeah.
Like
it's such an important job.
Like I can bring more representation by doing all these things than by working an office job just because I'm there. So, I think the way we think about how we bring representation in our community has to like change a little bit because there are so many different ways in which we can help elevate our community. But you have to think about like what skills and abilities you have and like how you can best be the representation without being miserable. Because then are you really representing us if you're like assimilating to another culture in that job? That's not true representation. That's just like
you're just faking it.
Yeah, that's just stats. You're a Latina in finance, but you're not representing the community.
That's worse. I say faking it, and then you say that's just stats, and that hurts because it's true.
Yeah.
It's such a. When you think about the jobs that we have, usually they're in the same areas, usually Latinos, it's because that's where we have our network, right? So like when someone comes from Mexico or, anywhere else, I mean, where do you find the most Mexicans, right? And then I work in restaurants for 10 years because that was my network. And now I have that network, and then I have a network in politics, and now I have a network in construction. And how do I bring all of them together,
Exactly.
So they can help each other. That's like the coolest thing. I'm gonna end with a question. What's your definition of success?
So my definition of success has like changed a lot over the past 2 years.
Okay.
I used to attach it a lot to money, just like my parents. Now my definition of success is fulfillment. So I don't need to be rich to think of myself as successful. I don't need to work at like a huge well-known company to think of myself as successful. But if at the end of the day, I can feel proud of the work that I'm doing and happy, with my life, and I'm able to pay my bills and have, a little extra to either invest or travel and like do things that I enjoy, that's success to me.
Great answer. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Sophia, for being on the podcast. La verdad que muchas cosas refrescantes y me voy motivado. Ahora yo también voy a hacer un casting, la verdad, porque a mí también me llama la atención ese show. ¿Sabes? No, le dije a mi esposa, le dije, oye, ¿sabes qué? Le hablé, ¿no? De ti, de Corporate Latina, y le dije que habías hecho ese casting para esta película. Y me dice, ella leyó ese libro, ¿no? Y me hablaba un montón del libro. Me dice, oye, hay un profesor, deberías intentar ser el profesor.
Yeah.
I was like, maybe I should, you know. No, but thank you so much for opening up about your life y por compartir la razón por la que haces las cosas, por compartir de dónde viene, ¿no? Que intenta ser chistoso y que te gusta unir a la gente. Y por todo lo que haces también, gracias por estar ahí y estar intentando abrir las puertas a más personas, porque como tú dices, ¿cómo vamos a llegar si no hay alguien que esté uniéndonos, ¿no? Y espero las personas que nos estén escuchando, si ustedes hacen algo que no vemos muchos latinos haciendo y lo están haciendo representando de verdad quiénes son y aceptando quiénes son, pues intenten abrir las puertas a alguien más. Y si lo están haciendo y solamente hacen una estadística, pues echen de ganitas y intenten ser ustedes mismos, porque si no, nunca vamos a ser aceptados como somos en realidad. La gente va a seguir esperando que cambiemos so that we can fit in. So it's not who we are, but we fit in. We're not taking a space.
Yes.
So it would be awesome if we could all work towards, opening those doors.
Yeah, I love
and
that.
just letting us be.
I agree. And thank you so much for having me too. This was a great conversation.
Thank you very much. Anything that you'd like to say to the show? So how can they find you on social media? So
I am on both Instagram and TikTok as Corporate Pero Latina. And I'm on Spotify and Apple Podcasts with my podcast Corporate Pero Latinos.
Y le recomiendo un montón el podcast Corporate Pero Latinos. Muy buenas conversaciones, episodios cortos donde habla de las experiencias que ha tenido. Y pues ya hoy cubrimos como 4 de sus episodios, pero vayan, escúchenlos completos. La verdad, it's a lot of fun to listen to, different experiences, on how people live. But muchas gracias, Sofía, de verdad. Y raza, cuídense y nos escuchamos el siguiente episodio. Chao. Raza, muchas gracias por escuchar el episodio de esta semana. Ahí te encargo que nos dejes un review en Apple Podcasts y en Spotify. Ya sabes, síguenos en tu plataforma de podcast favorita o en YouTube para que te avisen cuando salga el siguiente episodio. Nos puedes contactar en @betorrizo_ o en @que-te-tomas_ en Instagram y en Twitter. También nos puedes seguir en YouTube como @betorrizo o como que te tomas podcast. Music this week was by La Noche Oskura, LESFM, and from the Silverman Sound. This episode was produced and edited by me, Beto Rizzo. Photo and lighting was provided by Jean Reynoso, who you can follow on Instagram as @GNR_photo. Yo soy Beto Rizzo, and you're listening to ¿Qué te tomas? Bye.